Yeah, so by 2003, we were in Las Vegas, sitting looking at a 60-foot version of our design on the stage, drop downs, television things, getting on the elevator with Willie Nelson and Toby Keith, listening to them sing, a cappella, and just funny little, moments that were like, this is surreal. So for us, it was quite a lift, and then it opened up a huge number of opportunities for us elsewhere as well.
Sure.
So, yeah.
I'm very pleased to have Ric Riordon as my guest today on Life with Strings Attached. Ric Riordon is a celebrated designer and founding partner of the Riordon Design Group, a Canadian firm specializing in brand communications and interior design. Established with his wife Shirley in 1987, their award-winning studio collaborated with global publishers, creative agencies, and entertainment giants, earning recognition in over 80 international design books. With a career spanning over 3 decades, Ric's work shaped iconic brands in corporate entertainment sectors, including over 800 album packages for Nashville CCM recording industry and the American Country Music Award Redesign, still the standard for country music excellence 21 years later. A member of prestigious design organizations and a judge in the renowned industry competitions, Ric's passion for design, music, and storytelling continue to inspire through new ventures including Culture Q Design and Fussy Gardener. I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with Ric Riordon, and I hope that you do as much as I did. Hey, Ric. Great to see you.
Been a long time.
It has been a long time. Welcome to Life with Strings Attached. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I'm honored.
Yeah, I don't know when the last time I saw you was. I feel like it's been a very long time, like more than a decade, I think.
Back, and of course, the Rolodex is a little full, but I recall Revolution Music, drum lessons with Daryl.
Yes.
Then I think the Rhymers invited us to your guitar design show at the gallery in Oakville. So I'm not sure what year that was. I was trying to check that out, but I couldn't find it.
Yeah, that was November of 2007. That was our gallery. That was an art gallery dedicated to showing guitar as I think we said, an icon of contemporary culture.
Absolutely,
has exceeded the bounds of its utility. Yeah, indeed. Yes.
Well, it was a memorable show. It was beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
I've always thought of guitars as kind of a work of art. In fact, all instruments, really. I mean, when you think about the design and what it actually creates, I mean, it's beyond, the engagement of an instrument versus a static piece of art is quite extraordinary.
It is, and there's an ongoing debate between the fine art world. Well, it's not really a debate. Fine art world just says, no, it's not art. The design world and the guitar makers say, are you sure this one's not art?
Exactly. Well, that debate may continue on into the future. I don't know. That was when I was going to art college, there was always this sort of shaming that happened should you mention you were thinking of maybe becoming at the time it was called a commercial artist or a graphic artist, right? And any implication, we were always told that was prostituting your craft. And
right.
So given that I started for a 4-year program in fine art, that was one of the challenges I faced, because inside I knew my odds of surviving in a category I wanted to work in were more likely in the commercial field than they were in the fine art field. Very few people accomplish the level, I think, that sustains a career and a livelihood. And so that's that was my inward battle, I guess, through art college, was deciding which route to take.
Yeah, it's I just had a thought about the classic debate over the artisan divide between the craftspeople and the artists and the elevation of the fine arts. But a few days ago we were at the Vatican, and are Michelangelo's paintings in the Sistine Chapel not a commercial endeavor?
Well, the Catholic Church was a great patron of the arts. And so, of course, there was money involved and commission. And so in that sense, yes, it was very much a commercial venture on one level for the culture and the time. Yeah.
There's Raphael's in a church down the road from me right now. Oh, sorry.
Is that again, Jimmy?
Well, I was just going to say more. There's Raphael's in a church down the road from me here also. I mean, these were all, that's how artists actually got
You're in a
paid.
good place.
Well, I am in a good place. But that's not, wasn't, I was literally just thinking out loud, Rick, that, this idea of selling out to the commercial endeavors that actually many of the patrons of the arts, whether the church or wealthy families like the Medicis, paid artists. But I don't know that we can distinguish so clearly that wasn't a commercial endeavor, although we like to think it wasn't. Yeah. That's all. What do you think of that?
Well, I've spent a lot of time in Italy, and you clearly have spent more time in Italy. You're in Italy, I assume.
I am, yeah.
We're actually planning a trip next summer back to the Tuscan area, which we've really enjoyed in the past. But I remember being in Florence and just overwhelmed. We signed on for a kind of an art tour, and we were the only couple that showed up for the tour. Well, there was actually one other couple from New Brunswick, which was very strange, being Canadian, to have another Canadian couple. And so apart from the camaraderie of that other couple being from the Maritimes and my family growing up in the Maritimes, we were taken by a prof from a university in Florence on kind of he took us to places he would normally not take a larger tour group, just because he had access. And so it was a wonderful day. And he, of course, loved to share his knowledge about the paintings and the work. And of course, this sort of took us back to college days when we were listening to our prof from The Hague talk about just the meaning and sort of the satire often that was hidden in these paintings as kind of a jab back to the church, I guess, at the time. And interestingly enough, it's kind of that biting the hand that feeds you in a way, because a lot of these artists were disgruntled that they were so constrained by the various people that were patronizing their work in the church. And so that was an interesting perspective. But yeah, what a beautiful and memorable tour, though. It was a great day.
Yes. Sorry, my mind is going all sorts of different places. I've been to museums in The Hague also, and I'm always struck. I'm in love with the Delft blue. And every time I think of that area, I think of what a stunning blue that is, and how I always wanted to incorporate that somehow more into my life, and I haven't yet. But
well, the Dutch painters I have a particular affinity to realism, so of course they nailed it in kind of a very unique way, and the richness, the color, the depth, the composition, all of that was just so many great painters.
Yeah, much to the chagrin of my Italian friends, when I went through the Uffizi, the great museum in Florence, for our listeners who don't know, I know you know, but for those listening, I went through all of the classic Italian masters, of course, and there's really remarkable pieces there, like the Birth of Venus, from Botticelli. It's remarkable in person. It's a very large scale painting. It's wonderful. The Medusa is there also, which is on the shield, which is fascinating also. But you go through, the museum is set up sort of by time periods, and then you cross over into the Dutch masters and you see a Rembrandt on the right wall, and all of a sudden it's like, it's a bit of a leap ahead. It seems like a technological, we shot ahead like a century somehow. Yeah. There's a really big difference all of a sudden to what happened with the Dutch masters. Well, the sculpture in that museum is remarkable. There's that was a great day, and we got up to where Da Vinci had tested his first flight machines, and I think it was the late 1400s or whatever. I mean, just amazing what was actually going on so early before we realized its full ramifications, right?
Yeah, but beautiful part of the world. You're lucky to be there.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I mean, frankly, you're in a beautiful part of the world. You're in our other home. So we split our time between Tuscany and between Northern Ontario. So we're on the other side of Algonquin Park on Round Lake.
Yes.
And I know you're somewhere up there. I see your activities.
We're off the southern Georgian Bay Area. So that's been kind of particularly since COVID, there was like an exodus out of the city for people our age and slightly younger who had finally thought, you know what, we can work remote. Why are we trapped in urban land? We could move up and see the beauty of our country and live there and be there and work there. So that's been great. Yeah. No regrets. Yeah.
We were there about 1 year before COVID, and very glad we were there when COVID happened. So we weren't part of the exodus. We just happened to already be there. But, I don't understand how people in apartments and such got through that time period, because we live on a lake in a forest. There's no neighbors, really, and so the birds and the fish all seem the same. Yes. And we were in a bit of a capsule there, Well,
we were tracking with you simultaneously because we moved up just about a year before we had sold our company. So we were trying to decide whether to live on in the city. We had a lot of friends and ties there, but really where we are isn't that far that we can't get back when we need to. And it's such a nice chapter right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. And so let's talk a little bit about that. So when I met you, I knew you as a design firm. But my very first memory of yours, and I don't know if you know this connection, but I played for an artist by the name of Craig Douglas.
Yes.
And you did his first album cover.
I forgot about that. Wow. I was just talking to him a couple of weeks ago, actually. He,
Great.
I think we did 2 projects for him. I'm not sure. I think one was a solo and then one was the group, but I remember being with Kevin Birch was the drummer, I think, at the time. And we were out in a field just off the escarpment doing a photo shoot for the cover. And that was fun. Yeah. Wow.
Yes, I was not on the album. I toured the album for a few years. And as a matter of fact, I know the photo shoot you're talking about because my signature always went above the other guy. And thankfully, he was the last one in the shot, so he wasn't very clear. People didn't know it wasn't me, you know?
That's funny.
I signed over Adrian was his name, Adrian's face for years.
That's funny. We did a lot of local musicians, and probably that was kind of it sort of dovetailed with our chapter in Nashville, which set the stage for that in a way. And then, of course, you're never, it's the old thing, a prophet's never respected in his own town. So once we had some fame and fortune in the U.S., it kind of, when we brought it back home, it opened up a lot of opportunities we wouldn't have had otherwise. So that was, it was a good thing. Yeah.
And if I remember correctly from your bio, your design firm did roughly 800 album covers, I think.
That's a modest guess, just doing the math. But over probably 15 to 20 years, we did a lot of work in Nashville. And of course, as we got known there, opportunities in LA and New York came up. But it was always niche. It was pretty much in that same Christian contemporary music vernacular. We did a lot of some crossover with gospel and country. And I grew up with music. I love music. My dad was a huge lover of music. So there was always music playing in our home, whether it was classical or jazz or rock. I introduced him to rock, as most kids at our generation did. So that was a bit of a slow conversion, but I think I won in the end. But,
you did? All right. Yeah.
But he grew up in the Maritimes, so country music was his go-to. And he had some interesting stories. I mean, I think in many ways he was as much a groupie as I was in terms of, following guys like Hank Snow and Kitty Wells and all the early, Grand Ole Opry folk. And then 1 year, rather than go to the Maritimes, we decided I don't know how it happened, but it was the year Anne Murray's Snowbird had come out. And he said, we're going to Nashville this year instead of New Brunswick. And I said, oh, okay. That's, I was only 12, or 11 or 12. Anyway, we drove down to Nashville as a family, and I fell in love with the town even as a kid. I thought, this is a cool place. We did the Grand Ole Opry tour, and he spent, I think we sat in the car for about 3 or 4 hours while he hunted down Snowbird on a 45, right? And I thought, not sure I'm enjoying this. It was hot in August in Nashville, right?
August in Nashville. Ooh, that is hot. Yes.
But it was that was a fun experience, and little did I know I'd wind up working there for so many years and meeting so many cool people, and it was a really great chapter for our studio. Yeah,
wonderful. Well, I mean, that's actually one of the reasons that I was reminded that I wanted to have a conversation with you. Is actually you'd made a post that relates to the country music scene with Nashville, where you and your firm, I think there was another designer involved, if I understood the post correctly. You can clarify now.
Yes.
But where you guys designed the Country Music Association Award, and it's been in use now for more than 2 decades.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
You have to have a hero story with your firm. And I mean, we had quite a few, but I would say that was really a super fun project. It took a couple of years to go through the process, and it kind of came out of the blue. Actually, we'd been doing a lot of packaging in the States, and particularly Nashville. And what happened was I had a number of clients that I'd go down for a week, and by that point I had friends there, so I would stay with them, and then I'd do my meetings. And in between meetings, I thought, I'm going to do Music Row, some of the bigger labels, So I just, we did a little magazine thing. I can show you a copy of it here, which may be backwards on the thing, but
that's the image. That's the one I saw.
Culture Q, which we every year we did a bunch of projects that were kind of our highlight projects for the year. And we would do this little magazine called Culture Q, and we'd send it out to a bunch of people. So when I went to Nashville, I put together a package, and I went around to Sony and Decca and all the big labels. And I asked, who's your creative director? I'd love to get their card or whatever. And then I would do a personal note to them saying, hey, Bill, or, hey, Sue, I'm in town, and here's our latest Culture Q. And, if anything comes up, keep us in mind. Blah, blah, blah. Well, I did this for 10 years, and really nothing came of it. I got the odd occasional little, oh yeah, cool stuff, but nothing. So then I think it was 2001, we got a call from Bill Johnson, who was the creative director at Sony Nashville. And, in his beautiful Nashville drawl, he kind of said, hey, Rick, I've been watching you guys. I love your stuff. He said, I've just been waiting for the right project for you. And he said, I'm working with the Academy of Country Music, and we've got this horrible bowling trophy thing that we're using on CBS, exploding with guitars and cowboy hats and whatever else. And he said, we need to raise the bar. And he said, I'm not asking you to do a lot of work. I can't commit right now to the project, but I know you guys are the guys. So can you just do a couple of sketches for us of, what you might suggest? And so I asked him if he could give us some kind of creative brief where we get a sense of, well, what's the aim here? What are the specific goals? So there were a few things that stood out. One was grippable, because the thing they had was very awkward for the artist to receive on stage and hold during the ceremony, and something more contemporary and fresh and simplified. So so that kind of started the process. And so I got off the phone with Bill and said, yeah, we're in. We'd love to do something. Now, we had no idea of what was going on behind the scenes. I think they had like 55 board members as a committee on this thing, and that they'd actually invited 15 top American designers. We were the only Canadian design firm that had been asked. Okay. And so had we known all that, maybe I would have been a little more cautious about being all in. But Dan Wheaton was our creative director at the time. He was with us for about 16 years. He went on to work for George Lucas on some pretty cool stuff. And then Lucas was bought out by Disney. So Dan worked in San Francisco at the Presidio facility for a while, and then was I think he took a position in Seoul, Korea, or Singapore, actually. I guess it was. So now he's in Japan. It's hard to keep up with him, but Dan was like a shareholder in our company. He was with us right from the get-go and was a big part of our success, and he really led the design on the award. We had 3 or 4 designers working on it, but it became evident after the first round that Dan had it. I think he knew what to do with it. So it was an interesting process because we waited. I said to him, I said, Dan, I just got off the phone with Sony Nashville. Bill wants us to submit some ideas for the Academy of Country Music for a new award for their show on CBS. And I said, well, he's asked for sketches, but I said, we can't just do sketches. He said, no, we gotta look at their brand, right? Because we were a brand company. That was kind of our forte. So we studied it online. We asked for stuff from them. We dove in deep and came up with kind of a whole booklet, similar to our Culture Cube booklet. Just here's where you've been. Here's where you say you want to go. And here's what you might consider. And we did 3-dimensional drawings. We did full color renderings. We even did a little QuickTime movie showing what it might look like on television, where it pans in on the award spins around. There's some beautiful music behind it. And we sent it off. And 6 months went by. And nothing, not a word, we got it, I called a couple of times, left messages. And so we were a little concerned. And then one day I got a call from Rack Clark. So Rack was Dick Clark's son. And Dick Clark was one of the board members on this committee. Yeah. And he called and he said, you've nailed it. He said, so I'm going to give you the background here. So I have 55 board members, from William Morris Agency in LA. We've got all these different people in the recording industry that are weighing in on whether they like this or that or whatever. And he said, it's taken us 6 months to rally the sheep. And he said, but we knew right from the get-go, you just blew us out of the water. It's beautiful. And there's just a couple of little tweaks that we want to make. And we'd like to meet with you at RS Owens in Chicago. Well, they do the Oscars, the MTV Awards, like you name it, they do it. They're an American manufacturer. And so it was so cool. Dan and I flew down. And we kind of met with Rack and a bunch of people. And the guys at RS Owens were great. They even brought out an Oscar for us to hold just to get a sense of the weight and the feel and whatever. So it was kind of cool to be in that company and to, here we were, this little boutique design firm from Toronto. And all of a sudden, we're kind of like hobnobbing with these people that were way in a different category in life than we were. But it was a huge project for us, and it took us a few. They did a stereolithographic model off our. I think we were working in Illustrator, and they converted it to CAD because that's what they used for their machines and back in the day. And so by 2003, we were in Las Vegas. Sitting looking at a 60-foot version of our design on the stage, drop downs, television things, getting on the elevator with Willie Nelson and Toby Keith, listening to them sing, a cappella, and just funny little, moments that were like, this is surreal. So for us, it was quite a lift, and then it opened up a huge number of opportunities for us elsewhere as well.
Sure.
So, yeah.
That's amazing. It's an amazing story. And it's, I'm so glad it ties into the Oscar and the manufacture of that. And that they gave it to you as the standard, because of course I did kind of think of that when I went to when I thought about how to describe this award, because, country music is huge in North America, but we have a global audience. Our podcast is listened to on all 6 inhabitable continents. And not everyone actually knows what country music is. They understand, they've heard of it, but they don't fully know. And so, country music is actually a huge industry. It's been very influential. In the 1950s, which I think is where the original award that you were commissioned to sort of update, sort of comes from. During this period, there really wasn't country music, R&B, blues, rock and roll. In the 1950s, those artists, which we now define as those genres, were on tour together. Elvis was on tour with Johnny Cash, and I remember being, I was in Montgomery, Alabama when the Blind Boys of Alabama were inducted into the Hall of Fame.
Wow.
I did some work with those guys.
Yeah, I've seen
and
them
I remember
perform. They're amazing. Yeah.
they're fantastic, right? Yeah. And I remember one of the original members of the Blind Boys was so excited to be there next to the Hank Williams Museum. Because he grew up on this, and he was a gospel singer, an R&B guy, but he loved country music, and Ray Charles loved country music also, but it wasn't called that. And so it's actually this sort of defining and this sort of iconicity that most interests me in having this conversation, because it doesn't surprise me to hear that the original trophy was not maybe so well defined, because actually the genre and the time period was still quite tangential as far as what would be considered to be it. And over time, a lot of my work is sort of theoretically in guitar design as an icon. And over time, these tangents get refined. They get refined from my observations between two extremes of sort of the conservatives and the liberal, or the futurists and the golden years. And they have a different approach towards this. The futurists will refine, looking to make improvements. The conservatives will literally conserve the ideas, and they will create saints of the culture. They will bring them into the doctrine. They will create a book, a hymnal, of which we must sing from. From
that's
this.
a good metaphor. For what actually is going on.
Yeah, and the whole time it's sort of I'm doing a sort of a coning effect with my hands here. It's refining to the point where we eventually get to something that we all agree is quite distilled into the essence of what that is. And so you having the opportunity to update the award 50 years later, after all this refinement and iconicity has been established, where we all agree that's what country is, allows you to take all of those sort of ideas that were built into that original sort of trophy and do that work. And so I'm going to wrap this up in just 1 second here, but I think it's important.
These are good thoughts. Yeah.
A lot of times I literally went through this yesterday with somebody who's doing a brand development with another design firm, someone you actually know. I think you probably know James Wilson at Overdrive Design.
Yeah, he's fantastic. He's over there somewhere in Europe, traveling about, or seems to be. He's taking a lot of photography right now, doing that stuff.
So James and I are working on a brand development with someone, and I just walked someone else through. Why do we have to do all this? Because if you want it to fit within the culture, if you want it to be understood, if you want it to actually be a really, really great, well done design in the end, design is well considered.
Yes.
And as I quote all the time, Konstantin Brancusi, because I love his thinking in this, famously said that simplicity is complexity resolved. And so we have to deal with all the complexity and then figure out how to resolve it into the cleanest, most simplified form. And you did such a wonderful job with that with the CMA award, Rick.
So I have to correct you there, because CMA would be...
Sorry.
It's the ACM award, and the reason I say that is everybody says that. So you're not alone, Jamie. But it's interesting because someone made that mistake when I was in a meeting down there, and they went crazy because the CMAs came after the ACMs. The ACMs are like, I guess, they hold that up as being the Oscars of country music, and the CMAs are kind of like the daughter, the granddaughter, the whatever. They came along after. So that's just because we often get confused. Oh, you guys did the CMA. And it's like, no, we didn't do that one. We did the other one.
The American.
But, it's interesting. There was ACMs, one of the little labels that we worked with in Nashville right at the get-go. And it was, I have to give homage here to Charlie Peacock, who really started this whole thing for us. We met him at a concert in the States, and Dan Wheaton and I, the creative director I was talking about earlier, And Dan and I were big fans of Charlie, and we said, well, he's actually coming up near Buffalo. We have to go down and see him play. And he had a guy in his band, Vince Ebo, an amazing vocalist. And he had his own solo project after he's no longer with us, but an amazing voice. And I had discovered Charlie on a CD I'd bought. Well, back in the day, like this is going back to art college days, I bought an album by a band called Vector. And they had I think it's a one-off, Mannequin Virtue. And it was a great album for its time. And Charlie Peacock was the lead vocalist and keyboardist on that project. And so that had clicked in my head. And then fast forward, we were at Keith and Melody Green's Last Days Ministries in Texas. And they had on the ranch, they had a graphic studio called Pretty Good Graphics. And they worked on album jackets and all kinds of stuff, and Second Chapter Backs. A number of bands were in that area. They had moved from California to Texas to this property because they just didn't have enough space for everything. And through a friend and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we wound up there, and I was in Tyler one Sunday when we had some time off, and I picked up this Lie Down in the Grass by Charlie Peacock, and I thought, I know that guy's name. I don't know what it is, but I can't remember if it was a cassette or a CD back in those times, but I played the life out of that and really grew to appreciate him. And he's since gone on to do some pretty amazing things with Switchfoot, Chris Cornell, all these different musicians and people. And so we had a chance after the concert. Charlie was just hanging out with the band. And so Dan and I walked up, we talked, and we had brought our little package just in case. We thought, well, you never know. And I said, so this is some of the stuff we're doing, Charlie. And I don't know if there's a place in Nashville for us, but we had, because of Last Days, they had brought in the Apple the year of 1984. That's the year we were there. So we were early adopters of the new technology. And when we started our studio, we were fully Mac right up at the get-go. And early on, when you got so little for so much, it cost a lot and it didn't really do much till later. But we were glad we got in on that. And Dan was very innovative that way in terms of leading edge technology. And that really advanced our studio's capabilities. So I showed Charlie this stuff and he went, oh my gosh, this is great stuff. You have to come to Nashville. And he said, look, let me give you my agent's card. Like he was genuine about it. He said, like, come on down. Like, I'd love you guys to meet with Maggie Volz. And she happened to be the wife of the drummer or the bass player for the 77s, which is a band I really loved. So we wound up going down and meeting with Maggie. She was generous. She spent a whole afternoon with us looking through. And of course, we hadn't really done a lot of CD, or at the time CDs were the thing. So packaging for CDs. And so we spent a week before we went to Nashville creating a faux portfolio of all the, imaginary bands, great covers, the whole play out of what a package could look like and how we'd market these bands. And we had, this, she goes, I've never seen any of these bands before. So she's going through the portfolio like, wow, this is amazing. Like, what kind of music do they play? And it's like, well, they actually don't. They're not real bands. Like, we were up front. I said, we just want to get in the industry here. So we're showing you what we can do in your category. Yeah. So she said, this is great stuff. She said, let me just call a few places. So she called 3 or 4 labels and said, you got to see these guys. They're in town. How long are you guys in town for? I said, we're in town as long as we need to be. So we stayed for about a week, and we met pretty much every boutique label and certainly a few of the bigger labels that week. And we came back with, I think, a little project for Larry Norman at the time. And I thought, okay, well, this is something, but it wasn't anything really. And so Dan and I were a bit discouraged because we had one place we went was Benson Music, and the creative director was non-emotional, total poker face, just looked through the portfolio, kind of flipped the pages and, yeah, well, thanks for coming in. And yeah, if you're ever in town again, come on back, sort of thing. And so we walked out and I said to Dan, I said, I don't think we're going to get anything here. And he goes, really? He said, I think she really liked us. So we had this totally different impression And sure enough, in February, we got a call from Connie Harrington, who actually is celebrated. She's got tons of our awards on her mantle for writing songs with Trisha Yearwood and all these big stars. And we didn't know she was a closet songwriter on the side beyond being a creative director. But at the time, she just called and she said, look, we're signed on for a couple that are on our label. First album with them. If you're willing to come to Nashville, she said, I've never really worked with Canadians before, but if you can come down here for the photo shoot, we'll give you this project. And I think we must have done at least 300 or 400 projects with her over the next few years, and just grew to really appreciate her as a person. And I think that was the big thing. Just the relationships we developed with people there were really special and genuine, like beyond the industry stuff. So that was fun. And then we, of course, we got some nominations for Dove Awards, which is in their industry, the big award for best packaging. And of course that led to more exposure and so on and so forth. But but Charlie really kind of opened the door, and then people like Connie, who believed in us first, really kind of made it happen for us. So it was good.
That's really wonderful. Thank you for the stories and the insight there. I relate so much to it. I've spent quite a bit of time in Nashville myself, of course, in the guitar and music industry. And, my first visits to Nashville were, people find you there, they make connections, they immediately introduce you to someone else if you're doing something relevant. Yes. If you're not, they'll give you a very pleasant, oh God bless, bless your heart. And and bless your heart, by the way, is Southern for nothing's going to happen, or you're a little crazy,
Exactly.
But the very first time I showed up in Nashville to do business, that is, I'd been there as a musician on tour before, but to do business there, I met some people. They said, hey, you should show this guitar to people at the Opry. They made a phone call. Next thing you know, I'm backstage at the Opry with Vince Gill and George Groon, a number of people within our industry. And the thing that's so remarkable about Nashville that is so unique in the music world, and you engaged it in music, but also from the industrial design and arts level, that there is so much talent per square foot, per square inch in Nashville.
It's crazy
that it creates this really unique environment where there's really not much room for ego. Yes. Or to be a jerk. Yes. Like, because there's people, they don't, although we think of big fancy looks on country for the country stars, but the musicians could be wearing a pair of overalls and a t-shirt and be the best guitar player in the room, and you wouldn't know it by looking at them. And everybody on stage, and something that's unique about the Opry is that, and I'm not telling this to you, but for our listeners, is that every artist plays 2 or 3 songs. And so when you come to the Opry, there's 20 bands that night. And all the musicians are together backstage waiting for their 2 or 3 songs. And so you get this really remarkable coming together of all these world-class musicians. And it creates this incredible community environment where there's just, everyone knows that someone else can play your part and that you're going to get the gig because they like hanging out with you. And if you're jerky, you're not getting called back.
Right. Yeah, there's a wonderful creative energy in that town. It's and it's grown. I think people always thought of it as a country music town, but truthfully, because of its geographic position, heart of America, they can be to the East Coast and the West Coast, to the North or the South, the same amount of time. So it's really been because of the recording hub that's there, the level of recording studios, and its geographical proximity to all the places in America for touring, it's really become attractive to a number of artists in different genres, which is really great. And that's also played into evolving country music with the morphing of everything from hip hop and country together, or rock and country together. It's kind of pushed those music genres in, it's progressed them, I think, in a good way. So Nashville's played a pretty key role in all of that. And it's interesting. We have friends in Franklin that we met through our work there.
Yeah,
that we
it's a
stay
suburb
with.
of Nashville.
Yeah. And that's that's such a cute little. I don't know if you've been to historic Franklin, but it's really it's about maybe 20 minutes, I want to say, south of Nashville. It's a historic town that it's not Niagara on the Lake, but it's got that kind of charm factor. And it's really a magnet for all the artists because it's out of the city enough that they can buy their private properties and whatever. So there's a lot of money that's been invested in that area. And it's just, it's beautiful to see how it's evolved over the 20 or 30 years that we've been there as kind of a real community and just a beautiful place to visit and be. Yeah.
Right. And to your point, my daughter, when she was a teenager, was excited that we could go to Franklin because Paramore was huge at the time.
Right.
Not a country act, and Paramore was based out of Franklin. I think Jack White moved to Nashville also, you know. And so
he lives out that way. And, you know, you've got everybody from Billy Ray Cyrus to Toby Mac from DC Talk and all these people. Like, so it's such a convergence of various types of people in the creative industry, and it's really fueled a whole economy around that in terms of the retail component and just the sense of aesthetic and
the ancillary bits. So to your point, with the center, all of the tour bus companies are based out of Nashville. Yeah, because like you mentioned, they're kind of in the center. It's easy to get anywhere from there. So you know, there's so many tour buses, and then of course production companies who make the road cases and the lighting and all of these things all have a Nashville hub because
it's a great analogy for how economy works, right? In terms of how one thing feeds another and grows the health and prosperity of a community. Yeah,
exactly. And so, you know, there's so many different parameters that affect our lives, the economy. And it's interesting because, you know, you have been in business for many decades. You have to think about these things. A lot of our listeners and the people I work with are artisans. They're craftspeople who work by themselves. And, you know, economy in the day-to-day sense, people only associate it with finances. They don't associate the economy of a social economy necessarily, you know. And
a psychological economy, like a sense of well-being in your mind, just because you're surrounded by positive people doing, like there's a positivity about industry that maybe isn't talked about a lot, but I think there's a psychological component. We found this even in design over the years. I didn't take psychology in school or college. It seemed to be irrelevant. But as soon as I had a business of my own, I realized, so really like 80% of what we do is human psychology, and then 20% is creative. You have to figure out who these people are and what they're looking for and find some way of satiating that concern or that need or that perceived need. And then you can actually create effective outcomes. And I don't think you can till you really understand the people you're serving. And that was a big part of my growing up in certainly in the world of brand and design, for sure.
Yeah, you realize also that you're in psychology the moment you have employee number one.
That's true enough. Whether you want to be or not. Yeah.
Oh, I can't just talk to them the way I think. That's not working.
No, that's
I'm
not.
I'm going to have to adjust somehow.
True enough. Yes,
for sure.
And actually, it kind of, you know, what goes around comes around, because you realize there's some stuff in your own head you got to sort out so that you can better understand and appreciate people who see things differently. And that's a challenge for sure.
Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop is your premier fretted instrument custom case maker, and we invite you to create a musical instrument case unlike any other, one that's unique to you. Every Cedar Creek custom case is hand-built by highly skilled craftspeople using only select woods, Prominence Forge hardware, and premium instrument-friendly materials. At Cedar Creek Custom Case Shop, we're dedicated to helping you design the case of your dreams. Find out more at cedarcreekcases.com. So, Rick, I want to loop this back to this award because
I gave you my perspective as to how I see things being refined and the work that has to be done. I guess I should have let you say something about that, but I want to hear from your perspective.
You said it so well. I really have nothing left to say.
Jamie, you should shut up and lead with the question. No, but quite seriously, you know, there's a lot of things to consider, right? I mean, this is a serious project. It's not a project of self. It's not self-expression, you know, and you have to make that's really a defining difference between design and art. Is, you know, that the design has to meet someone else's needs besides your own, right? And so, would you mind just sort of speaking to the moment what maybe you might have gone through when you have someone with such an important icon come to you and say, "We're going to change this icon." And we want people to be happy with the results of it. Could you just sort of walk a little bit through the process?
Well, I can speak to our side of it. Of course, what I don't know is what was going on behind the scenes, like how Rack Clark, how Bill Johnson from Sony. We worked with Gale Holcomb, a lady from William Morris Agency in Beverly Hills. They were the 3-point persons, but behind them were a small army of people who were all weighing in with their thoughts and ideas. And no doubt someone had a daughter or son who owned an agency that had submitted a design as well. And, you know, you just don't know all the politics or dynamics, but we were very aware, to your point, of the weight of this project and the expectations that were being put on us to come up with something significantly better than what they had. And I think the fact that there were the point people we had were such a raw team, such an encouragement. Like every time we heard from them, it was like, we know you guys are the ones. We know you're going to take us there. We're already there. We're like, we love what you've done. So that gave us the confidence to kind of have at least a sense that we were headed in the right direction. And of course, there were refinements more around beyond the design itself, the tangible item. So once we got down to R.S. Owens and we were looking at these stereolithographic models, I have a sample of one here. It's basically just a plastic cast that they pull off the CAD drawing at the time. Now you have, you know, printers and all kinds of things. It would be a whole different, but this is like 24 years ago, right? So quite advanced technology for that time. And so it was really exciting for us to just kind of enter into another tier or level of work that we hadn't done before. We'd done a lot of packaging design and some pretty interesting custom packages. We worked with a couple of boutique package makers in Toronto that did some phenomenal things that nobody in Nashville at the time or in their wheelhouse knew how to do. So that gave us an advantage there. But this was our first, to your point, like industrial design piece. So a big learning experience. I think for them, things like the weight, you know, what do we, like if we do a platinum coating on it, how much extra weight does that add to the piece? And then the base itself, it has to be heavy enough to hold the thing on a counter or a mantle, but it also has to be something, you know, these small little petite country artists can hold on stage for 5 minutes or whatever when they're doing their speech and not feel like they're, you know, trying to lift weights. So the thing they had before was clumsy and busy and awkward, frankly, to hold and even to look at. So it's that old adage about simplicity is the mother of elegance, and I think that was what we were aiming for. Is how do we? Everyone felt like it needed everything to say what it was, and we were thinking, well, you know, the cowboy hat is kind of. I mean, it's a cliche, but if we do it in a way that isn't cliche, then maybe that's enough said, because it's such a iconic emblem for the category. And it gets us away from specific instruments being like, they had a microphone, a CD or album, they had a guitar neck, they had like everything was exploding out of this former iteration. And it took a little bit of talking to that point in our initial presentation where we did the little booklet explaining why we were taking it away, I liked your word distilling, because essentially it is that funnel thing where you're taking all the ideas and you're bringing, how can we streamline that down into something that has some modernity and a contemporary feel that helps elevate the brand and take a category that feels kind of old and tired into the next generation, right? And so our time, a lot of things in life are timing. The timing was right. They were ready for that change. If they hadn't have been, it would have been, it's interesting, fast forwarding, I think it was around 2015, so not too long ago, we were approached by Rack Clark again because of the success of that award. He was working with Alan Shapiro and Dick Clark to create the new Hollywood Film Awards. And he said, we're back. We want you guys in on this. So we went through a very similar process. It was a bit awkward because I was in California, actually in Northern California, during the time we were putting the presentations together. So the team, we had a good ramp up launch before I left. And then through that week, there was a deadline to get them some stuff. And we pulled all the plugs. We did everything we could. And I think we came up with 4 really good ideas for them. But they had a budget issue and some other things that restrained them from moving forward with the project. So it got put on the shelf, which was unfortunate because I think they had something there they could have worked with. But they have to think about production and the number that they're creating and post Riordon design, what's this going to cost us to do? And then there's all kinds of implications from a television standpoint as well. So, but so we were thankful. Like it's great to have a project that, I guess it's 2003 was the launch. So we're a little over 21 years now. They still are using it just as it was designed. And, unfortunately, they shipped it off to China, as everybody has done, to save costs on production. And it was funny, a friend of mine sent me a link to Good Morning America out of New York one morning, and some company has had our award and was talking about, how challenging it's been to create and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, here we go. We didn't do anything with that because, frankly, it's not worth our input at this point. And most people in the industry know that we did the award. So there's always these sort of, the next person that gets to pick up production owns it all of a sudden, right? And the designer is forgot somewhere in the process. So that's a challenging thing. But anyway.
Right.
Yeah,
that's a completely different part of the conversation, one that we go through regularly.
Well, you would, even as designing guitars or whatever you're designing, it's that sort of who owns this ultimately long term, and is credit being given where credit's due. I've noticed on some of your previous guests, they've talked about that challenge as designers and as makers, and it's a thing for the artist always.
Yeah, and the conversation is getting increasingly complicated with the amount of automation that's happening in the design industry through AI.
Yes.
In fact, I'll be on a panel in January about artificial intelligence and human design in music and what that means.
It's a big part of the conversation in the creative arts right now. Yeah, it's huge, especially among illustrators, because that's where I started in my career. And I follow a lot of my heroes and colleagues. And that's pretty much the topic right now is what is AI doing to us? And how do we either embrace it or challenge it? And because it's a bit of a wild frontier, there's not a lot of legislation in place protecting the rights of artists and material that's being sourced or used through AI to create new creations, I suppose you could say. But challenging. Yeah.
I mean, we're all borrowing from previous ideas. As a matter of fact, one of my first guests was actually the producer of the movie Fight Club, and he teaches narrative at a university also, and of course screenwriting and such. And he says, we can't actually create anything that we don't already know.
Right.
Go ahead. Draw me
Yes.
an alien that doesn't have eyes or a nose or any of those things that we all. It's really hard to do.
Almost everything is borrowed from the natural world around us. I mean, we're influenced by studying bugs to studying trees in the sky, right? It's interesting. King Solomon wrote, "There's nothing new under the sun." So if he wrote that, what was that, 3,000 years ago or something?
For sure,
like,
yes.
yeah, here we go. Yeah, it's true. And I mean, in a sense, that's how things progress, because we're borrowing from the discoveries of others to create new discoveries. And so that's how we build on our intelligence, our creation, those are the things that advance civilization. So it's a tricky tipping point there in terms of, ownership versus sharing. I guess we took that posture pretty much through the years. We had our design firm for, I guess, 35 years. And we always kind of took the notion, you would see something one of your colleagues had done, and you thought, wow, that's a great idea. Like, how could we adopt that to this project? Like, not steal it, but take the idea of how they've approached it and evolve that into our thing. But you had to be careful, because, then you run into that thing of, okay, well, now they're doing what I just did, and I'm not feeling good about that. And, you especially in the design community, it's a pretty tight community. You want to be respectful of other people's efforts and thinking. So it's a tightrope.
Until enough people have done it, where it's okay that everyone does it. And that's the part, right? Where's the tipping point? We're good. Right?
Exactly.
How do we identify that before we get there? I've noticed that particularly, well, let me juxtapose two ideas here within design and then the copyrights on it. So there are legacy companies, and in America, who will tell you that if you have a patent, you are legally obliged to defend the patent. And if you do not defend the patent, then you will not be able to enforce the patent when you want to. So you have to defend it at all times, or else you don't have the right to say who you're going to defend against or not somehow within their litigious system. Conversely, I saw recently a clip from a video where I think Jay Leno it's an old video. Jay Leno was doing a very early interview at SpaceX with Elon Musk. And it comes up where the rockets, he said, this is where we make the rockets, and there's stainless steel. No one else really does that. And Leno goes, oh, did you patent that? And Musk very quickly says, patents are for the weak. And he's like, what? He's like, well, when you think about it, patents don't progress anything. They're like in war. They're like landmines. They stop someone else from moving forward, but they don't move anyone forward.
Right.
And so it's better just to continue to be creative and move forward and don't worry about that. He said most patents can be defeated anyways if you have enough money. And so it was a really fascinating juxtaposition.
Yeah. That was sort of, I guess, the premise behind things like open source platforms and technology, right? Where everybody's sharing everything, and that's how we get somewhere. As opposed to, this is ours, it's licensed, it's our platform. If you deviate or steal that, we're going to take you to court. So it's a big challenge for every creative person, especially if you're at a certain level where you're that public with whatever you're doing. And as soon as you expose that, you're not only exposing your work for adulation, but you're exposing it for stealing, essentially, I guess, or what might be construed as stealing, I guess. But there's the tension. So I don't know.
So, this, of course, ultimately the concern is where does it begin to affect humanity's prosperity in a negative way? And so, often as a Canadian, I do a lot of business in the US, and if I cross the border, I have to deal with US customs, and they want to know why I'm there. And most of the time there's No real questions. I'm traveling on a B1. I'm here for business. B1. Okay. What are you doing? Fair enough. But every once in a while, they pull you in and they run you through the ringer and they ask you really what you're doing. And ultimately, what do they want to know? They want to know if you are doing a job that an American could be doing. Are you taking money from the American economy, or are you contributing to the American economy?
Yes.
It's not complicated. That's what they want to know.
Yep.
Right?
And that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a point where, I mean, here we are. We're doing a podcast. I'm sitting here on a couple $1,000s worth of basically home equipment. You know, I'm using a M1 MacBook Air, not complicated. Mac's cheapest computer that's a few years old at this point in time. I have an iPhone 15 Pro, which is worth probably as much as the computer is, maybe more. That's all right.
You don't owe any. You don't. It doesn't owe you anything.
It doesn't owe me anything. You know, I've got a set of headphones, a microphone, some basic lighting. It wasn't very long ago where, in order to pull this off, there would have had to have been a production crew standing here. A lighting guy, an audio person.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Everyone in the room. Expenses just going. You know, time is money, folks. Time is money.
And unionized.
And unionized. And the reality is, I'm here doing it on my, would I be doing this if I had to pay all those costs? Probably not. You know, you're at home, presumably on some sort of similar
pretty
home
much
/ business computer, right?
Yeah.
And it looks very good, by the way. Of course, I knew it would. Yes.
I thought, you know, if I got boring, at least the fire, it's sort of like that thing you have on Netflix or wherever it is.
Yes.
You turn on your fireplace.
It's wonderful. But the point is, we all appreciate the simplicity of what's happening here. But this really is the same sort of scenario. You know, musicians are very upset that they can't make money in the music industry the way it used to. People want free music. But you're at home recording on your own computer. You're not paying the studio. You're not paying the engineer. You're not paying the people who used to move the gear in and out of the studio all the time. You know, you're not paying for the printing of the CD or the tape or the record or whatever it happens to be. You're not paying the packaging company anymore. You know, you're benefiting from the removal of all these costs from the systems. And then you're complaining there's no money in the system. Well, where did the money come from? The money came from all that.
Well, it kind of
was the economy built around it. And if you remove it, the money was actually always venture capitalists who were distributing, buying and selling a product for a profit margin. And they said, oh, you're really good in Memphis. They don't have something like this in Chicago or New York.
Right.
If I pay for you to be recorded and you give me the exclusive right to take your album to New York and Chicago, we can get rich together. And the musician goes, okay. And then we sign up. I don't mean to make them sound dumb, but that was generally, it was like, oh, really, mister? You think I'm that good? Right? Like, it was that simple for the most part. But it was always based on the venture capitalists who saw an opportunity to distribute them and to take them somewhere else. And so there are more podcasts. There's more music being produced. There's more content being produced today than probably any other point in time in history. It'd be very hard to argue that that's not the case. And it has a lot to do with the fact that we've somewhat democratized and made easy access to be able to create. So now that we've established, if we can accept my proposition, if we can accept that as our current reality, let's just assume we accept that for the moment. Now, what value do you bring to the conversation? That's our role currently as artists and as business people and entrepreneurs. What value are we going to bring to this current, very easily accessible economy?
Yeah, well, this is the progress thing that we talked about earlier is, like I remember back in the early days of getting out of art college, fast forward to Lindale, Texas, two guys look like men in black come out in their Cadillac from Dallas to the ranch. We're all standing in the art department with our markers and letter set and, you know, watercolors and whatever standing around. And these two guys come in and put this little box on our table as the, I don't know, 10 or 15 of us are standing around looking at it. And he's telling us this is our future. And then he proceeds to do a demonstration, which was like the equivalent of spirograph. And I thought, or Etch-a-Sketch or something. I'm going, I don't think this is our future. I think we're going to be fine. Well, fast forward 2 years later, we're like putting out 25 grand mortgaging our home to buy 4 workstations so we can be on this new, thing called Apple, and the rest is history. But all of a sudden, within 10 years, film stripping departments and printing companies were going out of business because now everything could be done on a Mac. We didn't need a film department anymore. It was all going to be done in Adobe and sent off digitally to a printer. And that ex-nayed a whole industry, essentially, over. And now there's a few of those guys around still, but very few. And it's not the standard. And so that standard is always shifting. And I think being in the industry as long as we have, and kind of now being like, we sold in 2018, so we're not really in that game anymore. But I look back and I think what a mercy and a grace to be out of it, because you invent yourself over those years. So many times you're reinventing and you're relearning kind of the newer way, the better way. And it keeps the people that aren't willing to progress with that, they get left behind. They have to do something completely different with their lives. And so we were able, by hiring model primarily, because I think in a way I was sort of the Clive Davis of creative. I was able to find amazing talent to surround me, younger talent who were coming up with the new technologies and were staying ahead of the game. Which made it less exhausting for me. I could manage that, but I couldn't keep up with everything going on. And even, I think of like programs like Raydream versus what Illustrator or Adobe has done in terms of democratizing. I mean, anybody now can do some pretty amazing things without college education or without training. Most younger folk coming up are online learning things, staying ahead of it. And so it becomes exhausting at some point. And for me, I think I've always been, like, I started in the old school drawing class, learning how to draw eye to thing. And that I can still do. And if technology has a lapse, then I'm still good to go. I can still render my ideas on paper. And that's a thing that a lot of newer designers and illustrators don't do. It's all on Mac or whatever device they're working on. But so I think those are things that there are some things that stay the course, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And then there are other things that are just a part of the progression, and probably AI isn't going to go away. So how do we manage it? How do we advocate for legislation around it in terms of protecting the creative people and minds that are feeding into its system? And how do we legislate that? So a lot of those things are still open for discussion and kind of working through. And that's a big challenge ahead. I don't think I'll have to wrestle with it as much as the younger artists coming up, but yeah, it's definitely a thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's always continued to evolve. The rights are the interesting part of the conversation. If Joseph Schumpeter is right about his concepts of creative destruction, it's better not to try and resist it. It's better to continue to move Elon's idea.
Yeah.
Patents for the week. Move on, folks. Create something new. Be part of the future.
Of why he is where he is in terms of his success and his innovation. And yeah, I think we can learn from that for sure.
Yeah. And, it's the human capacity for creativity that makes us so unique in the world.
Absolutely. No, it's true.
And the reason I say that is that creativity we're talking about, that we highlight through our artists, because everybody's creative. We all need to figure out how to open up the pickle jar, but
does it have to be a pickle jar?
It doesn't have to be a pickle jar. You can see that. And so the thing is, actually, we find solutions. Yes, we identify problems. but we also find solutions. And
Well,
and
that's
so
the nature
I
of being
remain
creative, is being problem solvers, right? And
yes,
if you're a problem maker, you're probably not going to be a good designer. But if you're a
yeah,
problem solver, you're going to be on people's radar. Yeah.
yeah. I'm never more alive than when I'm in the fire, figuring out a problem. Like,
Yeah. I hear you. Yeah.
I'm awful at waiting for other people to find solutions. Like when I'm out of control and someone else has to do it, I'm like a caged lion, like walking circles in my room, my office.
How do we get past this? How do we get through this?
Let me at it. Let me at it.
Yeah. It's like Winston Churchill's line about how do you get through hell? Just keep going.
Just keep going. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
Rick-
we're still not like we haven't given up on design, but all through our design life, we were taking on home projects and working with clients to adapt in their work environment the interior design piece that kind of kept to the brand culture. And so a lot of that translated into interior design for some of our clients. And so Shirley and I have had this little side thing that we've done as a hobby over the years, Fussy Gardener Home and Garden Design. And I love to landscape design, and I have a background in architectural design. So I kind of have found my passion again in being a hands-on guy. And it's interesting with doing these drawings for clients, because I take elevations of the front and the back of their house, and I show them what it could look like if we did all the right kind of little details, such as fences and pergolas and landscaping. And I still do it in pencil, and I bring in the pencils, and clients go crazy. They just like, oh my gosh, did you draw that? You know, it's sort of that human thing that you don't get with a CAD drawing, that's kind of sterile, and it looks like anybody anywhere. So that's kind of where that play of real hands-on craftsmanship versus the digital arena, where you can be maybe misunderstood, like you're just one of the crowd. Everybody does that, right? So it's a way of creating that signature on your work. And I do all my landscape packages. Now we still do like a nice digital presentation, and we integrate some of the drawings with some photography, which I love to do as well. And so it all kind of ties together. But having ways to kind of differentiate yourself with the technology to kind of keep your foot in the door, that you own this, that this is something you do that's unique. And people agree. We worked with an architect who, on a few different projects over the years, that he's just remarkable. He would come in with these little doodles after we'd had our meeting to show us kind of what he'd heard us say. And I remember, like, my heart would beat. It's like, because it showed the feeling of what we were after. The drawing showed the human aspect of it in a way that the CAD drawings later on in the process, when you get into mechanicals and technical drawing, it just falls flat then. But those initial sketches were always, and I learned that from him. I thought, you know what, when I do landscape design, I'm gonna stick to just doing some hand drawings. And I think, people really appreciate that kind of human touch. And, I want to frame this, is what I hear almost every time I show them a landscape and an elevation of the front of their house and what it could look like. And that's, I think there's something there in terms of just that hands-on craftsmanship. I'm sure you see that in the guitar world when somebody's modeling the prototype or whatever, and there's something in the raw that's just so much more compelling, I think, than maybe, once you get into drafting out whatever you need to hand off to production or whatever. The
reality is we're always trying to, no matter how much we want to sort of put forth the ideas of selflessness, ultimately we're trying to kind of be happy and contented ourselves. We have to recognize that that's a part of it. And when you're creating something that someone else is going to experience, for them to recognize their own humanity in your work is powerful.
Yes. Well, I think we're designed to design. It's in our nature to do it. And when we do it, we're at our best. When we are bent on destruction, that's like the antithesis of what our real nature is all about. So, I think there's a mental health that comes from creating things. Like you said earlier, everyone's creative. I think we all are. I think I've met people who work in mines, people who build fences, and I'm always astounded at how they come at their craft or their skill, and how they've learned over the years to manage the secrets of the trade, right? And that's an extension of their creativity as a person. So it's pretty exciting to see that, and I find that one of the most thrilling bits about humanity. But
To go back to your CAD drawings for a second and your hand sketches, I just want to illustrate a point for a second. Every pun intended. So, because technology has become so accessible and so easy to use, young craftspeople, young artisans are growing up very comfortable with computers. They're growing up very comfortable with 3D drawings and modeling, and therefore taking that and putting it through to a CNC machine, which then can mill out the 3D drawing and such, is an easy extension for them. The people who develop their craft pre-CNC technology or pre-accessible CNC technology, because now you can buy a CNC machine for $3,500 and have it on your table in your garage, and it'll do the work for the most part. And so the challenge, actually, I was at a show recently in Germany, and someone had done some work, and I don't want to identify too much. Somebody who had been invested in their career earlier on said to me, "Hey, did you see this person's guitars?" I said, "Yeah." So they're doing some really interesting stuff. I said, "Yeah." He goes, "What?" "I don't want to see the CNC machine in the finished product."
Yeah. The spirit of it is lost, right? Somehow that mechanical aspect can really, it becomes too technical and literal, and it loses the spirit, or the thing that came up with another designer I admire recently in a thing I was watching was she was deliberately not doing the 3D drawings of the spaces that she was designing, because she said, when I do a pencil sketch, it still leaves room for the client's imagination. Once I go to that very literal 3D rendering, they lock in on every minute detail because it's all there. There's nothing left to the imagination. So she said that makes the process of actually developing the idea in reality more arduous, because they're holding you to a literal representation of what they've already seen and locked into. Whereas with the pencil rendering, there's this kind of opening to the imagination, to, like, if things have to morph as they often do as you start to execute, there are decisions that wind up, well, that's actually not the best way to do this. We could do this another way. And maybe we move this thing over here, do that. It's much more fluid, the process, when you're working from kind of an interpretive illustration as opposed to a literal illustration. So I thought that was a good insight, and I think that's really true. I remember I would do these doodles before I'd hand it over to the team to kind of render up the finished artwork, and the clients would get more excited about the rendering, like the hand-drawn rendering, than they did about the finished execution, because it was so close to what they were anticipating anyway that there wasn't as much excitement about the transformation, right? So you have to leave people a little room for their own thinking on how, I wonder how that's going to look. Like, I get the idea. That's great. That's got me there. Now take me to the finish run here. What's that look like? So I don't know. I don't know if that resonates with your guests or your people that are watching, but it's something that that I've observed anyway over the years that we've done different projects, and
I think it's interesting because on a psychological level, we negotiate who and what we are to a certain extent. I mean, not not completely. We have certain realities. I cannot negotiate my way through a wall, but not yet, anyways. But the thing is, the narrative, how we see something, what that object is, what it represents, is a bit of a negotiation within culture. When you're making something for someone else, I think the lesson that I take away from what you just said, Rick, is it's important to leave room for the client to be able to interject themselves into what they're getting.
It invites participation, and everybody wants to own it some way, somehow, right? They want to be part of it. And, over the years, we've had certain staff members, or we've had certain clients who, maybe it's better said, working with certain colleagues who it's my way or the highway. That approach, that kind of bringing your fine art self into a commercial context, or into a patronage sort of context, just never goes well. I remember certain artists. I remember an architect, actually. I won't name that person, but we've worked with a number of different architects. And this guy was like, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I think that's really kind of not a great idea. Here's what I think we should do. And I'm thinking, but actually I'm hiring you to do our idea.
Yes.
Did something get lost in translation here? Yeah, you're missing the point. Well, obviously that architect didn't get the job. And all that said, that person was a very creative, very talented architect. And I really loved, that's why they were part of the interview, was I love your work. Right. And maybe if we hadn't have had such a specific vision, that would have been, here's a check and just take us there, whatever that is. But that wasn't the criteria of the project. So, it didn't work for us. But anyway,
Yeah. And we see that with the guitar makers we work with, is that there's certain guitar makers that eventually arrive at a point where I don't want to make other people's ideas. They do it in the early days because they kind of need to rely on the fact that it's going to be sold.
Yes.
Right? They can't afford to just make it without understanding it's going to be sold in the end. They can't take the risk.
Right.
But eventually, if they establish their career enough, there's a number of the more artistic leaning ones who eventually sort of say, I'm not really going to do commissions anymore. I'm going to make what I want, and then someone's going to buy it. And
that reminds me of one of your guests. I forget his name now, but I watched. I thought it was quite interesting. I think it was the Red Queen guitar or whatever.
Oh, Randy Parsons. Yes. Yeah.
He was quite a character. I thought, good on you, man. Like he went back to his Alice in Wonderland metaphor and did other guitars after making that commitment with the difficult client. In the same family, not that specific guitar, but that was a great example of what you're talking about, I think.
Yeah. And actually he's one of those guys who has said, I really just kind of want to make what I want now. And then, I don't want to say he's flip-flop, but I think that it's an ongoing communication. The wrestling match continues, between.
Well, I loved, I'm a huge fan of Zeppelin and loved Jimmy Page, and I bought at the time I bought the DVD of It Might Get Loud, because I thought that was I was in Nashville, and something got canceled one night, and I was at the hotel, and I thought, well, what am I going to do? So I went down to the concierge and I said, so is there anything happening in town tonight? Because I have a free evening all of a sudden. He said, well, I think there's something over at the Cannery, or no, hey, wait a minute, you should check the Ryman. So Alabama Shakes was opening up for Jack White. And when you're just one person, it's easy to get a good seat because there's always that awkward missing seat up near the front. And so I got front row center, just me, for Jack White and Alabama Shakes. It was just an amazing concert.
Fantastic.
And, so it was fun watching It Might Get Loud a few times, because there are three guitarists I love, and just the interaction between the three of them, and generationally, right? The distinction of The Edge and Jimmy Page and Jack White. And it's just such a history of great innovative guitar playing there. But
and Randy was in that movie.
Yeah, I guess he was. Yeah,
he was the guitar maker that was in that movie.
That's right.
Actually.
Yeah. I loved all the cutaways, like the B-roll that they did.
Yes.
Jack White at his little cabin somewhere in the hills of Tennessee, you know, playing this and that, trying to make some noise. And it was
with
great.
a 2x4 and a string and a screw and 6 of magnet. Honestly, it was the best thing that happened in the whole movie to me. Was not
strip it down. What is this?
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. Well, great little film. Yeah.
It's so rock and roll, and that's really actually what ties in so nicely to this conversation about design and humanity and AI and the implications of it. Is it doesn't matter how perfect the computer can get it. The best part of that movie to me was Jack White making not guitar, but making a stringed something on his deck.
Yes.
And playing it, because we do these tours where we take guitars around the world to different places. And I remember being in Miami in a very fancy shop with these guys. We brought 50 guitars in. We're on tour with them. And I remember one of the guys looking at them, and they're not the icons. People look at a guitar and they say, who's going to play that?
Yeah. It's not a Stratocaster. It's not a...
and they literally mean that some people take that offensively, like, oh, it's not worth playing. No, what they mean is they cannot imagine what type of musician, what type of song is going to be played on that. Therefore, it may or may not be relevant. Mm-hmm. I choose to see that as an opportunity of, well, maybe you pick it up, see what happens. Yeah. With that, it's that moment, the possibilities that excite me so much.
Well, the big challenge musically, right?
But the thing is, when I spoke with him about it, he said that, it's not a rock guitar. I said, you have no idea.
Yeah.
What rock is.
Yeah.
Because I can pick up any guitar in this room and I will rock it.
Yes.
And it has nothing to do with the guitar.
Right.
At all.
Yeah.
And that's what Jack White showed us in that moment.
What are you bringing to it? And that's Jack White in that moment.
Because Jack White sounded like Jack White on a 2x4 with a string and a screw.
But when you strip it down, like we watched, I don't know if you've seen the Muscle Shoals documentary, kind of that little studio in the middle of nowhere that everybody...
I'm familiar with it. I haven't seen the documentary, but I'm familiar with it.
It's fantastic, and it's actually... since that documentary, the biography or biographical film of Aretha Franklin, all these different people that went there, from the Stones to the Beach Boys to whoever. And it was really just, they just had this kind of Southern, backwoods sound going on that nobody could replicate anywhere else. But it was that almost the early black music, kind of just... whatever you could put together in the back shed and sit on the porch and make music, right? It was was kind of the origins, really, of a lot of American music, which is, it's great. But
back then, those rooms had a big influence on it. In fact, I was listening to Aretha Franklin a lot this last week. And I was explaining to my wife, I said, people always think that these musicians had a really raspy sort of voice. And some of them did. But for the most part, what you're hearing is distortion of the tube preamp, and the engineers would ride it right on that red line to get that sound. So that you would have a little more, and it compressed and it distorted, just like we like with a distorted guitar. The vocals were doing that. And interestingly enough, then the next generation of vocalists thinks that they're supposed to do that with their throat and then blows out their vocal cords all the time.
Bad idea.
But that's where that sort of comes from. And those are back then, the rooms made a huge difference. There were design parameters that happened in a physical space. It was the recordings, it was the instruments, it was the limitations of the microphones, the limitations to the room, the placement of where they were. Reverb in those old places like Muscle Shoals or Stax in Memphis was literally putting a speaker in the bathroom and then a microphone a certain distance away from it in the room so that they picked up the reverberation of the room. And that was the reverb effect. It's the bathroom.
I sound better in the shower.
Exactly, right? We all sound better in the shower. And so it's those they were literally physical parameters. And so I've had some discussions with people who are developing AI. So I've done some work with the people who developed the first robotic citizen of the world, Sophia, and Ben Goertzel and SingularityNet. And we talked about some development that they were doing with some music, such, and it was all about improvement. And I said, can we actually use it to do the opposite? Can we dial it back? Can we take something that sounds too perfect and can we interject limitations onto this to sort of dial in the humanity, if you want, or dial in the imperfections? Because that's what we remember. We remember the voice of Louis Armstrong or Willie Nelson or
Sam Cooke, people like that.
Sam Cooke or whoever it is. And there are modern examples of that who have really quirky and strange voices. I'm failing to remember who they are right now, but even Macy Gray's like 30 years old, but she had a really weird voice also, you know, and if it's a perfect voice, we don't remember it. Yeah. That's what American Idol is full of, is these voices that sound they sound amazing, but they actually don't sound like anything. Yeah. It's the quirkiness, the oddness that we remember.
That's the personality in the voice, right? Yeah. And you think of all the great vocalists, like from Janis Joplin to, I think it's Brittany Howard, isn't the lead vocalist from Alabama Shake? She's got such a unique and distinct voice.
Yes.
And you think about these people, it's the signature vocal, right? And almost anything you would do to perfect that in a studio would just ruin everything. It's a good point that you make. Like, it gets back to did you do a raw drawing before you show the beautifully executed 3D rendering that you can spin on every angle and show top and back and down and forward or whatever. The same is true for voice. The same is true for guitars, for drums. Like some of the raw drums that Bonham was doing in his early years, in the studio. Like, I think what they were in Jimmy Page's Castle or whatever, and just the acoustics in the lobby.
Aleister Crowley's old castle.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes,
was like that
at the bottom of the stairs.
This is where we need to record, right here.
When the levee breaks, I think is what you're talking about. The sound on When the Levee Breaks is at the bottom of the staircase that had this ascending sort of,
it's
and
so cavernous, right? You just got this kind of real mountain feel about the sound. It was, it's just amazing. Yeah.
It wasn't an audio plug-in. Turn up the reverb. No.
How do we achieve this? I don't know.
Yeah. Reduce the decay.
Yeah.
No. It was literally like, okay, the microphone. Okay, a little higher.
Yeah.
6 inches. Okay, no, down 2 inches. That's it. True, that's how it was done. Yeah. So I think that part of our humanity is actually going to be to interject our imperfections back into the system. Kind of, that conversation between Neo and was it Mr. Smith? I don't remember, in the Matrix, where he tells him eventually, there's actually been an X amount of iterations of the Matrix, but actually it was too perfect. And your sniveling humans wouldn't accept the perfection. You needed the disease, you needed the problems, and honestly, I think that's part of it. I think we're going to need to interject that imperfection as artists, but it's always knowing, the artist is knowing how much or how little to take it. The art is in knowing that right spot.
And that's as true for a sound engineer as it is for a musician themselves. And, that's the chemistry that brings the great art, is when you get all of those things aligned right. It just brings about something that it's shrouded in nuance, but even the average ear hears the difference. They go, ooh, that's nice. What is that? Right. So I think that's kind of a thing to remind ourselves of as we move forward in really whatever discipline of the creative arts that we're working in. Yeah.
Within the context, within the creativity of where we are in the moment.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, the perfection of the incredible guitar gods of the 1980s, we rejected it with the grunge era. We rejected the sugar-coated pop of the 1950s with, something more sort of raw, with one Rubber Soul hit with the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix later on and such. Yeah. When the camera came around, we said, well, that's enough of trying to make it look perfect. We better do something else. And everyone said, that's not art. And there was this big debate as to whether the camera, a photograph, could be considered art at all.
Yes.
And now, of course, we don't discuss it. And then even later on, there are people who are not trying to use it as art, like Harold Egerton from MIT, with all of his sort of high-speed photography, trying to understand physics, trying to understand what happens when that drop of milk hits the plate.
Yes.
And then the famous photograph of Milk Drop Coronet, which also ends up, by the way, on the front cover of Faith No More's Epic.
Yeah.
Milk Drop Coronet is the graphic artist put it into the image there also.
Yeah.
And so, but Egerton, they did a showing of his work at the moment. He's like, I'm not an artist. Like, well, we think you're an artist. He's like, but I'm not an artist. I'm a scientist.
Sounds like a Monty Python skit. I'm thinking the argument.
Oh, the argument was a fantastic skit.
The argument department. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the main thing here, Rick, for me is that we constantly evolve. We constantly look for contrast as in humanity. And when things get a little too perfect, we start to actually look, we reject it and we go for the golden years. And when things are a little bit too in the past, we want to refine and move forward again. And the artists are the ones who sort of, lead the charge, I think.
Yeah.
And we'll continue to
You're
do
right
so.
about that. I think if we don't reference the past, the future will become sterile and devoid of humanity. And there's a lot we can go back and learn. And it's interesting hearing younger artists coming up who are referring back to, people, even your mom and dad, my mom and dad loved, as a reference for what was that was going on and how do I make that part of what I'm doing, so it's this, again, borrowing, learning from other creative people, past, present, future, right? That's how it kind of moves the party forward. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's difficult for us to remember exactly where we are because right now, I think 1984, when I think of Van Halen's Jump, I still think of that as somewhat modern era music somehow. But when I go back to 1984 and I go back 40 years, which is how old that is now, it's Benny Goodman. And I certainly I was not willing to think that Benny Goodman was modern music in 1984. I want to listen to Benny Goodman as much or more than I want to listen to Van Halen at this stage of my life. But it seemed like an impossibly far distance away.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's interesting. And it's like, I think about people like George Martin, who, what he brought to the Beatles recording kind of when they were probably at a point where they'd either drop into oblivion. He kind of resurrected their career post Epstein, right? In terms of taking them into the studio and showing them the possibilities of what could be surrounding their beautiful melodic tunes and great writing, to kind of enhance it and take it to a different level. And he was borrowing on a lot of classical music, really, in terms of, introducing strings and things that really in rock hadn't been a thing. Then, of course, you have later on ELO picking up on a lot of that same thing. And then you've got further on again, Tears for Fears, borrowing from some of that and bringing it into their era in the 90s and, so on and so forth. It kind of, it's interesting, the convergence of all of those histories of music and how they, they really do progress a sound. And they help thread for those of us who are from those different eras, an appreciation for where it's going, which is, kind of what sort of like carrying the baton forward, I guess, in a way for everyone. But that's how I see it. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, I think of the person who said it best for me was Hegel when he talks about the thesis generating its own antithesis, which generates the synthesis.
Yes.
And so, what you're talking about is taking one music that we now call the old music, and the new music borrows from it and creates that synthesis,
right?
The new style,
yes.
And that new synthesis becomes the new standard. We move forward. So I played a trivia game with our family. Was driving recently, and my son loves trivia, and so he put on this trivia game as we're driving to pass the time. And part of it was identify these mashup songs,
right? And
one of the mashups came on, and they said, MC Hammer. I said, Rick James. and when the answer came along as to what the answer was, they said, and that was Rick James, but I'll also give you a point if you said it was MC Hammer. Because MC Hammer's Can't Touch This is a Rick James lick.
Yes.
But it was such a huge hit on its own. Yes. You kind of have to give it its own space now.
Yeah.
Right? That's the synthesis that becomes the new thesis.
Or as they used to call it, success by association.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, that's the borrowing and the copyright conversation, because that was a huge conversation in the 80s.
Yes.
But, all of the old singers, Sinatra or Ella Fitzgerald or whoever it was, they all sang the same songs. Even
Tony Bennett, all those guys, they were all playing
Gershwin show tunes and
yeah.
such. The Jazz Standard Book. We didn't call it ripping people off. That we're just doing their own versions of their own songs, and so that again is perspective.
Yes. Well, we benefit more from a collegial spirit than we do from an adversarial spirit, and that's true in all of the arts and probably in politics too, if we could take it there. But that's a whole other discussion. Yeah.
That is actually where Hegel's thesis came in. It was a political one, and we do move things forward through that way. If we could just understand that we need each other's different ways of approaching the world. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And appreciate it as opposed to hate each other for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
True enough. Yeah.
Well, Rick, this has been a great conversation. I really enjoyed my time with you today.
Likewise. Thank you. Thanks.
I would like to sort of throw it back to you to say, listen, if I were a better interviewer, is there something that we should have talked about today that you were hoping that we would discuss before we wrap this up?
I like the conversation format. I like the fact that we can bunny trail. I'm good at bunny trails. I'm ADD by nature, I think. So
we call that creative.
That's right. Sorry. I think it's been quite enjoyable. It's good to catch up. I'm curious on how you wound up in Italy. Like a short story on that, maybe, if you have time.
Yeah, you can ask. Sure. Yeah, no problem. Yeah. So I am in Tuscany, where you're thinking about coming. I'm between Florence and Pisa right now.
Yes.
Honestly, I've been traveling the world now for a few decades, meeting with guitar makers wherever they happen to be. But of course, I developed my career. That art gallery showing that you were at is a very clear line to what I do today.
Right.
And so those types of instruments are where I sort of made my name within our industry, is with the really remarkable, unique, world-class instrument makers.
Yeah.
And as you travel around the world, meeting with these people, seeing their shops, eating with their family in their homes, they show you around their village, where it happens to be. And
like a living university experience.
Yes. Yeah.
Amazing.
And when you're walking around, if it's appropriate, I'd say, just out of curiosity, what would it cost to get like let's say a 2-bedroom apartment in this town, in this city, wherever it happens to be. And what was really remarkable to me is, as I traveled throughout Europe, and whether it was in the UK or whether I was in Germany or the south of Spain, wherever, often the answer came back at basically $400 or $500.
Pretty
and
affordable.
As someone who lives where you live, which is where I have lived most of my life,
the most costly planet or country on the planet now, it's like ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah, and you hear those numbers, you go, really? Because that sounds really, really good. And so, after a while of sort of thinking about this, the kids are grown up. Both my kids are married. They're living in different parts of the world. Yeah, they live 6,000 kilometers in opposite directions from us. One lives in BC, one lives in Strasbourg, France. First grandchild is here.
Amazing.
No one's at home. Yeah. Home can be anywhere.
Yeah.
And honestly, I said to a guitar maker friend of mine who lives here in the hills in Tuscany, I said, I'm thinking about getting a place. We really like Tuscany. I might like to look at some places when I come to visit you.
Yeah.
He responded like in 10 minutes saying, Jamie, we have appointments on Thursday.
No turning back.
And he set to work on making it happen. Honestly, I got to give props to my friend. And there's a group of people here, and there's an international community here.
How's your Italian?
It's not very good. And I will make one more confession about that.
Yeah.
I was in Firenze, where you were talking about, by the Uffizi, surrounded by the copies of Michelangelo's statues, because they don't leave the real ones outside. But having dinner, and there was a table of English speakers behind me, and I was so distracted. And I was like, I don't know if I want to learn the language. I don't know if I want to understand what people are saying around me. I think there's an incredible piece of not knowing what's being said, to be left to your own. Because I was... Normally, my wife and I, we talk through at the meal. We're very engaged. We have a great relationship.
Right.
And I was just so distracted. I'm like, maybe I won't learn Italian. Maybe I'll just enjoy my ignorance here in Tuscany.
Ignorance is bliss, they say.
Exactly. Yeah. So to be continued.
I remember that. I think is it Bernini, the sculptor that is in the Uffizi. There is a beautiful work of his that is this woman with her flowing hair all in granite, and just like every strand and the muscles, the sort of the whole form of that sculpture. I think there are 2 or 3 figures in it, and I couldn't get my eyes off that. Like we stood there for a good long while, just his work. We saw that in a number of places. In
the hallway, by chance, like that. You look out past it, and there's the famous bridge out there in Florence. I think I know where you're talking about. Yeah,
it's in the main. Like once you get past the, there's a long linear hall. It has little tiny windows along it, and it's kind of featured in there, so it catches some of the natural light. And it's just a spectacular sculpture. It's mind blowing that anyone could do that in granite and not be breaking pieces off as you're trying to do these very fine. Unbelievable. Yeah. But stuff Wonderful. Like that's so inspiring. And the more you get exposed to that, it opens up possibilities in your own life as you start trying to think of how you can take that level of excellence to what you do as a craftsperson or a designer or an artist. So that's something that you're very fortunate to be surrounded by such a legacy and history of culture and art. Italy is full of that, so you're in a good spot.
Well, it was intentional. I work hard. I put a lot into what I do, and but I get empty. Yeah, and I need to go and fill my soul. Yeah, and I need to go to an art gallery, to a really good restaurant. Food fills my soul also. Yes. The kind of food that takes the palate and it overwhelms you. To another close your eyes and nothing else exists anymore. I'll pay good money for that experience at a restaurant. And so I need to be in a place that's inspiring. And so I have a house on the lake, in the forest, beautiful, in Canada, and a place here in Italy. And that's important to remain inspired. Yeah. So I have to be conscious of time. We got to wrap this up, but we'll take another just couple of minutes. We'll wrap up here on Life with Strings Attached. And thank you for being on the show with us, Rick. We're going to continue on for those who are listening for another 2 or 3 minutes on the business of guitar / business of creativity with Rick. And if you are interested in the business of guitar, head over to patreon.com/business of guitar. That's patreon.com/business of guitar. And you will hear a man who made a wonderful career in the creative world for decades and has left his mark, and we're all better for it. So thank you, Rick, for being on Life with Strings Attached. I've really enjoyed it.
My pleasure. Thanks, Jamie.
Okay. Bye for now.
Bye for now.
Thank you for watching and listening. You can find more episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts. And a special thanks to those who support us on Patreon. It's your support that enables us to do this work.